Record.
Hi, Graham Doran, along with Kerry Miller, my good friend, like always, the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. We are 2 weeks away from Selection Sunday and only 1 week away from having a mock committee bracket through the Banner Brackets mock committee. Kerry and I are both going to be on there along with Rocco Miller, Dave Oman, Anthony Valentino, and Tim Kruger. So it's going to be a good time. We're going to get into a
And
lot of
Shelby. Don't forget
discussion.
Shelby.
And Shelby, I can't believe I didn't mention Shelby Mast.
Yeah.
So it's going to be great discussion. Bunked, I would say all friends at this point and bracketologists alike. Going to be terrific. But let's get into some of the weekend action that happened. Let's start in the ACC. We had Duke kind of being Duke, Clemson picking up another win. Where do you have Clemson right now?
I have Clemson up to a 4 seed now. I have not, just to be clear, I have this behind me now. I'm experimenting with where I'm going to stand for most of this mock committee video stuff. Really, I just circled the results of the bubble battles so we can look at that every now and then. But yeah, I have Clemson at 15 overall, and I'm surprised they got that strong that quickly. I felt like before they beat Duke, it was like if they didn't win that game, they were they were on the bubble, probably like a 10 seed or something. But man, they've put together one heck of a resume in a hurry. Like we focus so much on Duke all the time because obviously they're going to be a 1 seed, but and then we focus on the bubble of the ACC that sucks. And I feel like we've overlooked how quickly Clemson has really moved up the overall seed list. Do you have them as a 4 seed too now?
I was very, very carefully comparing Purdue and Clemson, and I ended up with Clemson 17th overall, my best 5 seed, but I feel like they're right there. Like all it takes is one result, whether it's for Clemson or for another team on the 4 line, for them to move up there. I think Clemson feels like a 4 seed to me instead of a 5 seed at this point. And ultimately, maybe the Kentucky win won't hold as much weight as we thought it could, but that Duke win is worth its weight in gold.
You mentioned the Kentucky win. That's why I ended up with Clemson at 15. I have Kentucky at 16. I think I'm lower on Kentucky than most people, but we can get to that later. We can stick to the ACC, which it's not a long discussion at this point. I think it mostly focuses on North Carolina, really. Wake Forest is down and out at this point. SMU's got to be gone, if not permanently, certainly temporarily. God, I cannot believe that their metrics keep them hanging around there. Yeah, I erased them. They're gone. I'm not considering them anymore, but they're still showing up on my spreadsheet annoyingly. But it might be a 3 bid league, man. But North Carolina's getting interesting with all the other bubble results. Right now, I have Indiana, Ohio State, and Nebraska all among my last five in. But Ohio State still plays Indiana and Nebraska. Like some of those teams are going to fall out. I don't know if North Carolina needs that win over Duke anymore. Like the bubble has helped them out so much. I don't know. Where are you at on North Carolina? They're my second team out right now.
They're my third team out. I think the Tar Heels don't necessarily need to beat Duke, but if not, they need to do some serious damage in the ACC tournament. I think their resume is close enough that this isn't going to be like a Vandy or a Texas A&M situation where the committee thinks they made too much ground up in the conference tournament. They
Yeah.
weren't really on our minds beforehand. I think UNC, even if they lose to Duke, will still be close enough that they'll be, in mind headed into selection weekend. So I think the Tar Heels, if they don't beat Duke, still have a shot, but it would really kind of depend on who they play in the ACC tournament. I think they'd have to probably beat Clemson or Louisville in order to get to that spot, or Duke. And that can kind of just come down to whether they get a 4 seed, 5 seed, all of that.
Yeah. So I went ahead and shared my screen, which was obvious. Probably didn't need to say that. You saw that happen. But North Carolina is top 46 in all of the metrics now, except for KPI, which you've certainly brought it up in the past. I never appreciated it before, but KPI is really all about getting those high level wins. And that's what North Carolina is lacking, right? They're 1-10 against quad one, that one win, a 2 point neutral site victory over UCLA over, Christmas, New Year's week, which I mean, it counts. It's still a nice win, but I have UCLA as like a 8 seed right now. So that's not a marquee win by any stretch of the imagination. And obviously it's not a quad 1A win if they're 0-8 in those games. And for them to be 1-10, with a quad three loss as well. I forget who that was even against. Certainly not the Hawaii game, although they almost lost that game.
Stanford.
The Yeah, oh yeah, oh God, yeah, my boy Jalen Blakes won that one for Stanford. But yeah, like normally, right, 1-10 against quad one with a bad loss in that mix. That's not a team that's going to be in the tournament. But this year, right, we're comparing them to Xavier, which is 1-9 against quad one. Cincinnati, who's 1-10 against quad one. It's just it's ugly out there, man. I don't want any of these last four in to be in at the moment. Let's go back to 64, please.
I think that's a big lesson for me is a lot of the teams that you think should be out aren't necessarily out. Wake Forest
Yeah.
is one of those that comes to mind. Barely survived Notre Dame, but they did survive Notre Dame. And I think that keeps them in the hunt right now. I think you could even argue Wake Forest could be right near that cut line right now if you wanted them to. I don't have them that close because, frankly, I don't think they're good enough based on what they've done so far, but I could get the argument for it. And I think there maybe a Duke win away from all of a sudden, maybe not just being in, but being fairly firmly in if they could win at Cameron Indoor. So I think this whole season we've been talking about UNC's got to beat Duke. UNC's got to beat Duke. Wake Forest has to beat Duke. And
Yeah.
maybe potentially the Blue Devils are looking ahead to that game against UNC. Wake could catch
Yeah. And they almost beat them in Winston-Salem a couple weeks ago. But yeah, I have Wake. I think they're my fourth team out, and that's assuming they do lose to Duke because this will be for my Tuesday AM bracket. So I'm assuming I got to kind of bake in the Monday results, and then I do adjust it. But initially I have Wake at 72 on my board. Yeah, if they were to win that game, if Duke starts handing out quality wins, right? It just feels like we're talking about Gonzaga here. Can they, in years past, not this year Gonzaga, but usually it's like, are they going to help out St. Mary's in San Francisco? That's kind of where we're at with North Carolina and Wake Forest right now with Duke, where if Duke doesn't hand out those marquee wins here down the stretch, it might be a three bid league. I do
yeah.
think that I think Wake Forest has to beat Duke. I don't think North Carolina has to beat Duke to still be in the mix, but obviously it would be a big, big help.
I agree with you on that side. Let's turn our attention then to the Big East, a league that you've considered really with the ACC the entire year, and to me, it makes perfect sense. You combine them; they're almost one giant power conference, but one power conference worth of quality teams this year. Just a down year for both leagues. So the Big East, headed by St. John's, conference champions for the first time since 1985. Huge moment in Madison Square Garden, not necessarily to beat Seton Hall, but to accomplish what they've done this year. Only 4 losses on the season. Terrific year for the Johnnies. Where do you have St. John's seated right now?
Yeah, they're creeping up. They're in the mix for a two seed. I project forward a little bit. I'm assuming I guess I could check the score, but I'm assuming Michigan State's going to beat Wisconsin, and then Wisconsin will fall a little bit behind St. John's for me. But I have the Johnnies at 9 overall. Thought about putting them at 8, but I still have somehow Texas Tech as my 8 overall seed. I don't know. It's weird, but they're there. And we talked about this before about like possible one seeds. If they were to win out, if they end up at 30-4 with that Big East sweep, good luck. Looking Rick Pitino in the eyes and saying, "You're only a 2 seed."
Yeah, all of the talk last year about the Big East being disrespected, it just feels like even if it's not the right thing to do, you really want to leave a 4-loss Big East champ out of the top 2 lines? It just doesn't feel right, even if that's not what the metrics say. Like, you can make a very good argument. Net 18, KPI 19, 3-4 versus quad 1. That is not a top 2 seed. But I think you look at the 4 losses overall, you look at the strength of record being 7, the wins above bubble being 8, and just frankly how tough St. John's looks to play. I actually moved St. John's up to 8 overall. I think 8 overall and all the way to 11 overall are really, really close for me. I have St. John's, then Iowa State, then Texas Tech, then Wisconsin. But if the committee reversed those 4, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I think those are all 4 tightly bunched teams. One of them is probably going to emerge as a 2 seed eventually.
Yeah, I agree with everything. I think that I've seen a lot of people this morning have both Michigan State and Wisconsin on the two line, and I just, granted, that's going to short itself out here in a few minutes to some extent, but just something about having two Big Ten teams on the top two seed lines. And I know the committee's not going to say that, but right, at no point did it feel like a Big Ten team was a title contender this year. Like we've been in a constant state of trying to identify the one Big Ten team that is actually a top 10 team in the country. And just something about having two of them in the top eight rubs me the wrong way. So I think even if Michigan State and Wisconsin weren't playing each other at the moment, I would have found an excuse to not have them both on the two line, I think.
Let's move down a little bit. Marquette, 5 or 6 seed, do you think?
Where do I have Marquette? I think I have them at 20, 21. Yeah, so exactly in that range. I have them at 21, and I think I had them at 21 a week ago too. Like that, there's not a glass ceiling there or anything. Like they had some really nice wins early in the year, but they're not the same team. Like it feels weird to say that right now they deserve to be seated ahead of a St. Mary's or a Maryland or something like that. So I've settled in on them as the top six seed for now, but we'll see what happens in Madison Square Garden / what happens in the final game. They get St. John's at home to end the regular season, so they could definitely help themselves out there.
I have them exactly 21st overall as well. So looking at UConn and Creighton, I think UConn arguably lock right now. Creighton, I think, probably in slightly worse shape than UConn, but not far behind. Really hard to see either of those teams missing at this point. Xavier, though, I think that's the real attention grabber from the Big East right now. Are the Musketeers in? Are they out? What do they need to do?
I have them in. They're my last team in. I don't like it. I don't like any of my like I have Indiana in and clear of Dayton right now, which feels disgusting, but that's how the last five in are shaken out right now. So I have Xavier in at whatever 48. Their last team in. That win over Creighton. I mean, it was only a quad two win, but I mean it's a high quad two. Now they have the road win over Marquette, the home win over Connecticut, home win over Creighton, and their only bad loss was at Georgetown at a point in the season when the Hoyas were not what they are today. I mean, they were pretty darn good back in late December, early January. I think the committee will look at that specifically if they're considering, pointing to that as the bad loss. Like, you got to make sure that's actually a bad loss, and I don't think it was. So I think that's kind of a differentiator for them, just that they don't have anything particularly negative on their resume. But man, they've just been hanging around, and then they finally get a pretty nice win on a day where the bubble just beat the shit out of itself. So I think they're just barely in at this point.
Yeah, I think for me, Xavier just barely out of the tournament right now, but very well could get right there. Villanova, do you really think they have any life left in them or not?
No, I still have them on the board, and that was I hadn't really looked at the schedule. I think they play what Butler and Providence or Butler and Georgetown or something. They don't have a marquee opportunity remaining, and they need one based on their schedule or based on their resume. So I mean, I think if they win them both and then they go on a run, like they would probably be if they get St. John's before the Big East final, if they win that game and then they lose to whatever Marquette in championship, maybe. But it's a stretch.
Yeah,
They probably don't belong on the board at this point.
I think so as well. So let's go ahead and move over to the Big 12, where I think we've kind of identified 4 teams in that league as being really some of the nation's elite. And they're all ranked in the top 10 of the net. So let's look at them: Houston, Texas Tech, Iowa State, and Arizona. Houston, do you think they're going to keep a 1 seed by Selection Sunday?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. So what they get Kansas at home, and then they finish the season. I forget who they play against. I have it on my spreadsheet here somewhere. Houston get at Baylor to end the season. So that, I mean, that's more important for Baylor than it is for Houston at this point. But I, unless they lose both of those games, and unless they lose early in the Big 12 tournament, I think they probably hang on to it. I mean, a one-loss Big 12 champ, that'd be insane.
Well, I mean, there's 16-4 against quads 1 and 2. 4 of those are
Yeah.
quad 1A wins. If you combine that with their quality metrics, I think they're going to hold on to that. We mentioned Iowa State and Texas Tech, both as potentially being maybe 2 seeds or 3 seeds. Arizona, I feel like they're a pretty solid 4 seed at this point. What are you thinking?
So I have them at 17. I think you and I are flip-flopped on Purdue and Arizona because you mentioned earlier Purdue and Clemson as being a tough call for you, but I have Arizona at 17. That's the big thing for me right there is that they're not anything better than a bottom 6 seed as far as any of the resume metrics are concerned. Obviously, when you watch them play, some of their predictive metrics are great, but those predictive metrics were great before they even beat anybody. I think that's what, early in Big 12 play, they were still top 25 across the board in Ken Palm net and whatnot, and they were winless against quads 1 and 2. So I think they've certainly proven that the predictive metrics were right. They were better than, their 4-5 record for sure, but I think they have a little bit to go to be in the same conversation with an Iowa State at this point.
No. I think what's keeping Arizona up at 15th overall for me is it's the 5 quad 1A wins plus the quality metrics. I think when you
Yeah.
combine the two of them, it paints a picture of, okay, not just are the predictives pretty good, but they've actually gotten some really good wins to back it up. Kansas, I think, is kind of teetering the line between a 6 or a 7 seed right now.
Mhm.
BYU seems to be between a 7 and an 8 seed. Baylor, where do you have the Bears?
I gotta scroll down. They're my bottom 9 seed now, even with 12 losses. I still think they have a good chance. Oh, family time. I see my daughter. Um, yeah, I don't think they need to beat Houston, but they can't lose to what do they have? Cincinnati and Houston remaining. Or TCU. They got to beat TCU. That's a big bubble game. If TCU gets that one, they've got a chance to get in their own right. But yeah, I think Baylor's still semi comfortably in. We'll see what they do down the stretch because if they end up at 17 and 14, they're not getting in.
Yeah, I think TCU sweeping Baylor could potentially put the Horned Frogs in. I think actually it might be worth looking at TCU really quick because they're all the way down at 70 in net. So they're one of the teams in the Big 12 that a lot of people probably haven't been thinking very much about
Yeah.
uh, for that reason alone. But you look at it, they are 16 and 13 overall. So they're kind of beyond that record that you can't take. I think they have an acceptable record to take. And they play Baylor, and then I actually can't see the last team because of
At at Colorado, sorry.
in Colorado. So I
Yeah.
think if they win both of those, maybe one win in the Big 12 tournament does it. I don't even know that they need to win multiple games in the Big 12 tournament. Those would both be pretty decent wins. Maybe not great wins, but decent wins. And I think if you look at what they've done from a kind of spectacular home side, BYU at home is looking a lot better. Happened a while ago, but that has aged very well for TCU. Obviously, they already have the win at Baylor. Beating Texas Tech at home is looking better by the day as well. And at Arizona State, maybe it doesn't show up as being a win against the tournament field, but that's still a difficult place to play to win in Tempe. So I think TCU is, I'm higher on them than I think almost any other bracketologist is, to be honest. I think TCU has the formula for an NCAA tournament bid, and it might not even be anything crazy. It might just be winning 3 of their next 4.
Yeah. No, I think I mean, they're still, yeah, they're on my board. They're not dead yet. But yeah, the big thing for them is they got to win out. The worst case scenario for the Big 12, right, would be TCU beating Baylor and then losing to Colorado. That's how you become a 7 bid league. But they are right there in that magical number, right? 56 and a half for Rutgers a few years ago. Granted, Rutgers had 6 quad 1A wins. TCU doesn't have those high quality wins. I think 6 and 13 against quads 1 and 2 is not great, but as you're saying, if they win, they beat Baylor, now they're 7 and 13. They win at Colorado, now they're 8 and 13. They win their first Big 12 game, now they're 9 and 13. Then they get interesting. I don't think they're close right now, but they could get there. They have winnable games remaining.
What do you think about Cincinnati? One of the more interesting teams in the country to me. Uh, really bad record against Quad 1A, 1 and 10. But all of their losses against Quad 1 are against Quad 1A, and they've
Yeah.
been really good when playing anyone besides Quad 1A. What do you think about the Bearcats?
Yeah, I think they're a step behind North Carolina for sure. Just another team that doesn't has blown every major chance they could get. I don't remember what was Cincinnati's one good win. Um, was it Villanova? No, they lost the Villanova game. We were together for that game. I should remember that one. I know they didn't do anything in non-conference play. That Dayton win aged like a fine milk for them. Looked good at the time. Must be the BYU game. Is that enough? Is BYU top 30 now? Is that their quad one? Yeah. Home against BYU, 26. So that's their quad one win. Nothing special. No better than North Carolina's win over UCLA. They don't have any terrible losses though. So they're still hanging around. But I do think they probably needed to win that game at Houston on Saturday. Beating Kansas State, Oklahoma State, that's not going to move the needle. So I think they need to win those two, and they probably need to make it at least to the Big 12 semis to have a realistic shot. But they're still hanging around. I should probably move them from Bubble Central over to Not Dead Yet because I think they're much more TCU than Baylor at this point. But we'll update the whiteboard later.
If you look in the far right column there for the game scores, Cincinnati's intriguing because that's a lot of green over there. And then when you look on the left, you see a lot of red. So they've lost a lot of games that they've actually played pretty well in, which
Yeah,
I think tells you Cincinnati is actually a pretty good team. They just don't seem to have the results to back it up.
yeah. Well, that'll happen when you're one of the worst shooting teams in the country. Sometimes they just can't hit anything.
Let's kind of wrap up the Big 12 here. Final team I want to talk about was West Virginia. Mountaineers have an 8-12 record against quads 1 and 2. Only 3 wins against quad 3, so they're actually 11-12 overall against the first 3 quads. Do you have concern about West Virginia's tournament spot?
They're getting iffy for sure. 12 losses and not marquee losses as of late, but you mentioned Arizona has those 5 quad 1A wins. That's what's keeping West Virginia from really dropping to the bubble for me. I think I still have them as my bottom 10 seed, even after kind of no showing at BYU, which whatever, that's the hottest team in the country right now. And playing on the road is always tough in Provo. So I didn't really fault them for that too much, but that would have been nice to get. What's their remaining schedule? They play at Utah and versus UCF. So not great, not opportunities by any means. You go 1-1 in those, that's probably a net negative. I would guess those are both around, zero point 0.4 wins above bubble games. So they'll probably slip a little bit if they don't get both of those. But for now, I think they're still my bottom 10 seed.
I noticed I said 11-12. I'm going to say 12-12 against
Yeah.
the first 3 quads. But one thing for the Mountaineers to keep in mind, as bad as they've looked at times, no team has missed the tournament with 4 wins against quad 1A. And in a
Hmm.
bubble this bad, do you want to say no to a team with 5 wins against quad 1A? Seems like kind of a tough sell to keep them out at that point.
Yeah. You were saying that the other day about Connecticut and Creighton. Like, yeah, in normal years, right now, the 8 and 9 seeds would be on the bubble still, but it feels like there's just no way you can drop that far out when comparing them to a Nebraska or an Ohio State. Like, they would have to just absolutely decimate their own resume down the stretch, which West Virginia, if they were to lose to Utah and UCF, that would not be good. Then it does become a problem. Those 4 or 5 wins don't make up for 14 regular season losses. But for now, I think they're okay.
Let's switch gears and get to the 2 leagues that are going to lead the NCAA tournament in numbers of bids. Let's start with the Big Ten, and then we'll go over to the SEC from there. So Big Ten, we already talked a little bit about Wisconsin and Michigan State, and looking at a score update here, see
Yeah.
where we're at.
Michigan State's up 5 with 2 minutes left.
Michigan State, I think, is a really solid 2 seed if they can get this win against Wisconsin. I just don't see much that could happen that would knock them off the 2 line. I wouldn't want to say it's a lock, but I would feel like Michigan State wouldn't have enough to get up to a 1 seed based on the way the other teams above them are playing, and they really wouldn't have enough to fall to a 3 seed based on the way the teams on the 3 line have been playing. So feels like Michigan State's probably going to end up a 2 seed if this result holds. Moving on, let's talk about the Illinois Fighting Illini. Haven't been shooting the ball very well from three. Hasn't prevented them from jacking some up.
Yeah.
What do you think about Illinois and their seed future?
I think I looked at that the other day. They're like 14-2 when they shoot at least 27% from three, but we're like 32 games into the season and they've only shot better than 27% in 16 games. They should probably stop shooting 30 per game, but good luck telling Brad Underwood that. But yeah, I still have them at 29 overall, so they're my top 8 seed. I would not want to face them as a 1 seed because they are such a schizophrenic team. I mean, if they are hitting those shots, they got a ton of talent, but they don't deserve it. They're, you pointed to West Virginia's 12-12 against the top three quads. Illinois is 12-11, and they don't have as many marquee wins as West Virginia has. So they've definitely been one of the toughest to evaluate teams out there. Like I think if you nail Illinois and Gonzaga this year, you're probably going to be doing very, very well in the bracket matrix.
Yeah, couldn't agree more there. What about Michigan? I think I've been a little bit lower on the Wolverines than others. I moved them up to my 12th overall seed, my final 3 seed today. But I just don't quite see the top end there. That I think if you just look at the basic quad splits, you're like, holy cow, 8-3 against quad one, 3-2 against quad 1A, 7-3 against quad 2, no losses in quads 3 and 4. Looks absolutely stellar when you look at it that way. But I don't see a whole lot of depth there for the Wolverines. What are you thinking about for them seed wise?
Yeah, I have them at 12 as well. That's assuming a win over Illinois today. That was also Illinois at 29 is assuming a loss to Michigan. But yeah, I thought they might be a little bit higher than they were in the top 16 reveal, and that's kind of making me question them tad bit how strongly I feel about them. But if they were to beat Michigan State in the season finale, I mean, there was a point not that long ago where I still thought Michigan could be a 1 seed. So I think 12 is about right for them. I wouldn't be shocked if I'm off by a full seed line in either direction, though.
We already talked about Indiana a little bit earlier. Both of us have them above Dayton at the moment, which is crazy to think about. Something else that hadn't occurred to me until this very moment. Potentially two blue bloods could play a first round game. Kansas and Indiana could both be trending towards 6-11 or 7-10 games. That could happen.
I thought you were going to say Indiana, North Carolina in Dayton. We could get that too.
Okay. That could be there too. That would be fantastic. Let's move on to Nebraska. They're a team that really intrigues me. I still love the road wins over Creighton and Oregon, just enough to keep them in as my last team right now. What do you think about the Cornhuskers?
Yeah, they're my next to last in again because of those two wins you mentioned. Like they haven't gone anywhere, but that 17-point loss to Penn State the other day was not good. The home loss to Minnesota yesterday, not good. It felt 2 weeks ago, it felt like they were a lock for a 9 seed, somewhere in that range. Granted, mid-February 9 seed, maybe lock is a strong word, but it's hard to believe they're all the way down to last team in, next to last team in, but they got to play their way in. And I think they have Ohio State on Tuesday and then a home game against Iowa on Saturday. Like I think there's still a scenario where all three of those teams, Indiana, Ohio State, and Nebraska, get left out. It would have to be Indiana loses to Oregon and then beats Ohio State. Ohio State beats Nebraska, but then loses that Indiana game, and then Nebraska loses to Iowa. But I don't know. Could be 11 teams, could be 8 teams. Who knows? Still a lot on the Big Ten bubble.
Let's move on to the SEC, the conference that will get the most bids this year. I don't really think that's a controversial take. So the SEC obviously been fantastic. Is Auburn overall number one locked in or just very likely to be there?
No, I can't see them dropping off at this point. All they have left is Texas A&M and Alabama, right? Not going to take a bad loss. I, I guess in theory, if they were to lose to South Carolina in the SEC tournament, that would be bad. But yeah, I think they're locked in at one overall.
Let's jump a little bit further down the bracket into Kentucky, kind of a team that I have as a 4 seed, you have as a 4 seed. Are we potentially going to see the committee favor these last couple results for Kentucky in seeding and make him more important than some of the other games that have been played this year?
Yeah, Kentucky, I keep struggling with them just because they have so many marquee wins, but they don't put together winning streak. Like they never, it doesn't feel like they've ever put it together. They just have a couple of really, really good wins, but also a lot of losses. Like every time I'm thinking about putting Kentucky higher and higher on the seed list, like I always find a reason to bump them down. Like I said, I have them at 16 right now. And I know I'm a little bit low on them compared to other people, but yeah, Kentucky's a really tough one for me. And considering how much we talk about blue bloods, I should probably have a a stronger stance on the Wildcats, but I really don't. I feel like they need to probably win the SEC tournament to get up to a 2 seed, even with six quad 1A wins, because they've just taken so many losses.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for me, with the Jackson Robinson injury,
Yeah.
I'm really going to be paying more attention to these last few games because I do expect this to be a topic of a lot of discussion for the selection committee. It's one thing for somebody to miss some games, it's another thing to think, okay, this guy's not going to be available for the tournament. Who are they entering the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I agree. I totally forgot about the Jackson Robinson factor, but yeah, if a guy is out and you get a few games of evidence what they look like without him, yeah. If they look bad down the stretch, that could definitely impact things. They could drop because then they'd have what 12, 13 losses. They already have 10, so they could get to 13 if they really struggle down the stretch. Yeah, I could see them slipping to like, given how many strong candidates there are for 5 and 6 seeds right now, they could drop several seed lines if they really falter.
Well, let's talk about Vandy. I think they're probably a close to a lock at this point. I'm not ready to call them a lock, but hard to see them dropping out of the tournament. So, do you have any disagreement there, or do you think Vandy's pretty well set?
No, I think they're probably the most comfortably in team that I have not called a lock yet. I have them as an 8 seed now, and it's hard to imagine they could drop, 15 spots in the next 2 weeks. But yeah, what a week. They went from smack dab on the bubble to solidly on the 8 line for me.
Yeah, I was going to have them as an 8 seed, but I ultimately got down to Vandy or UConn, and I just couldn't say no to the Huskies. Even if it's not right, I just couldn't say no to the Huskies. So let's take a look down at the bubble. Georgia, I think we both have fairly comfortably in, even though first, you know, a late surge there for the Bulldogs, but I think I have them in the 9 line. I don't know where you have them, but comfortably in at this point.
Yeah, I think I have them as a 10. Or no, I still have them as an 11. But they're clear of Dayton for sure. Like they're on that in range. Like I tweeted that this morning, like 19 through 43, the whole time I'm working through that seed list. I'm like, man, I can't believe I'm putting this team this low. And then I got to 44. I'm like, I don't want any of these. So it's like Georgia is like clear of that mess, but we'll see what they can do. What do they have left at South Carolina? That's no good. Home against Vanderbilt, not great either. So either one of those could be damaging to their case.
I think Texas is in real trouble at this point, and
Yeah.
Arkansas and Oklahoma to me are kind of when I talk about the true bubble, that's the true bubble, right? That's what we're really looking at. These are the teams that it's like it's not about messing up or it's not about over exceeding expectations. It's about if you just play the way that we think you're going to play, it's a really close call, and it could kind of go either way. I think both those teams really desperate to get a win now, and Oklahoma almost had that road win that they needed so desperately for their profile. Now they've got to go to Austin and win. I don't see any other way besides that.
Yeah. I think Oklahoma probably needs to win out. Who they face? I got to scroll down my spreadsheet. Missouri and at Texas. because otherwise they're at least 8 games below 500 in league play, even though it's not on the team sheets, whatever. It's still something that we all know about. Um, I know you're kind of running the point here, but we got 2 minutes left because I have not paid for Zoom, and we got to talk Gonzaga real quick.
Let's talk Gonzaga. So I actually moved the Zags up to an 8 seed. I thought they might get to a back end of a 7 seed for me. It's not that the win at San Francisco changes my opinion on them all that much, but what it does do is we have the eighth team in net, and we have a team that's now 500 against quads 1, 2. And I think that's really important because I think if you're a committee member there, you're thinking, I don't want them too high up the bracket when they have a losing record against quads 1 and 2, and their resume metrics are hovering close to 40. It's totally different when you can say, hey, I get it. Their resume metrics are close to 40, but look at us. They're still 500 against quads 1 and 2. And think about all the teams above them on the seed list that aren't 500 against quads 1 and 2. I think it just makes it an easier sell and easier to stomach. So I like the Zags moving up to the 8 line, but potentially even room to grow if they can play well in the WCC tournament.
Yeah, that's where it gets interesting. Right now, they're somewhere in that 30 to 35 range, I think, probably for most people, but it's really the looking ahead. If they win the WCC tournament, 5 seed, probably, they'd be right there neck and neck with St. Mary's, wherever you have them at that point. So I think they have the opportunity to jump more than just about anybody else, which was also the case last year at this time. So they've gotten comfortable in this little area, and they'll probably make their 10th straight Sweet 16 anyway.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, literally. Thank you, everybody. Happy hoops.
Take care.